If you search map of France, you'd find maps like this, or this, or this. If you look at maps done by bigger brands like National Geographic, you'd find basically the same thing. Except all of these maps are technically wrong. No, I'm not talking about a mistake on the border or a weird printing error. I mean that these maps are incomplete. A proper map of France should look like this. Some of you might be thinking, oh, you mean like France's colonies? And yes, I see why you'd think that, but technically these aren't French colonies. Yes, France, like many European nations, does have leftover colonies under its control, and these areas are still overseas. But unlike colonies, these areas are an integral part of the French Republic. Think of it like this. If I showed you this map and I called it a map of the United States, I'd be mostly correct, but it seems a bit weird to not have those little boxes for Alaska and Hawaii down in the corner, right? What the French call their overseas departments are different from their other overseas territories in the same way that Alaska and Hawaii are different from Puerto Rico and Guam. The structures of France and the United States are different, but basically overseas departments are France's Alaska and Hawaii. But why did these areas become a part of France? We'll learn about how France got its overseas departments. But first, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Ground News. It's always important to keep up with current events, but even more importantly, it's good to know what perspectives the news are coming from. You gotta have better critical thinking and be aware of bias after all. Ground News is a platform that makes it easy to swipe between headlines to discover which details are being emphasized, exaggerated, or even left out entirely in a news article. You can also see how the news is being spread or ignored across the political spectrum with their tools like with the blind spot feed. Some stories just aren't being covered by everyone. Oh, look, a story that's actually balanced in coverage. That's very rare. I appreciate being able to filter the news this way, and if you click the link below to try Ground News, you can get it for free, or you can subscribe to get access to all the features you see here and support a team of independent media outsiders working to make the news landscape just a bit more transparent. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. So all of France's overseas departments are under the same laws, protections, and rights as the rest of France. They get to vote in elections, they get representation in the French legislature, and so on. The area of France in Europe is referred to as metropolitan France, in the same way you would refer to this as the contiguous United States or the lower 48 as it's often nicknamed. To briefly go over the list of overseas departments that I will pronounce in very bad French, we have the departments of Guadeloupe and Martinique, which are both in the Caribbean, the department of Guyana, commonly called French Guiana, in South America, and then finally the two departments of Mayotte and La Réunion off the coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean. Now, you may be wondering why all these overseas areas are different from France's colonies. They did start as colonies after all. The answer to that lies in the Cold War. Every European colonial power went through an era of decolonization during the Cold War, where most, if not all, of their colonies became independent. But each one handled it differently. France after World War II established the French Fourth Republic to have a fresh start after being occupied by the Axis powers, and one of the things created by the French Fourth Republic was the establishment of the French Union in 1946. The French Union was an idea for transitioning France's colonial empire into a singular state. French Guiana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and La Réunion were turned into full departments of France at this time because unlike France's colonies in Africa, Asia, or the Pacific, they had been under French control for multiple centuries at this point. Most other colonies of France were turned into overseas territories, the idea being that they're not ready to be fully integrated into France, but hopefully they will be. Then we had the protectorates of France, which turned into associated states. Protectorates were basically areas that on paper were their own country, but a colonial power was entirely in charge of their foreign policy and defense. France's protectorates, now associated states, were Morocco, Tunisia, and after 1947, the newly formed Indo-Chinese Federation made up of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. France wanted these nations to join the French Union, but none of them wanted to be a part of it. The final category of the French Union was the UN Trust Territory. This was a rebranding of the League of Nations mandates from World War I, former German colonies that were supposed to be held by France until they were ready for full independence. Now, obviously, they were effectively treated the same as other colonies, but in this case, they were supposed to be on the track to full independence, so they were not a part of the French Union's plan for integration. Now, the French Union, while at least a tiny step away from colonialism, was not popular. When your only options are join France or wait until you're ready to join France, you can imagine not every former colony was enthusiastic. There was also a huge elephant in the room in the form of French Algeria. Believe it or not, Algeria was considered an integral part of France since 1848. They had multiple departments and everything. However, the local population did not like this, and the French Union certainly didn't change their situation either. By 1958, all of France's associated states had declared independence, and Algeria was in full guerrilla warfare trying to leave as well. All of this, along with political problems back home, caused Charles de Gaulle to form the French Fifth Republic. All of this led to the French Union being replaced with the French Community. In 1958, every overseas territory was given three choices: integrate into France, remain an overseas territory, or become an autonomous member state of the French Community. Of the overseas territories, these areas voted to remain as such, while the rest became member states of the French Community. The lone holdout was Guinea, who basically held a middle finger and just declared full independence anyway, and France let them go. Ironically, Gabon originally wanted to become a French overseas department, but the French government convinced them to change their minds, thinking that taking on Gabon would be like a, quote, stone around a swimmer's neck. Jésus-Christ, de Gaulle, well okay. So clearly there were some attitudes of prejudice affecting this process, what a shocker. This weird incident known as the Gabon Affair made France look hypocritical, and eventually it led to an amendment in 1960 that gave the option for French community states to choose full independence whenever they felt ready to do so, which most of French Africa felt ready. That's why so many French colonies got their independence in 1960. Algeria also finally got full independence in 1962. Later on in 1975, the four-island colony of Comoros wanted independence. Well, three of their islands wanted it. The fourth island that voted against independence was Mayotte Island, and Mayotte Island became an overseas department in 2009, giving us our four current overseas departments. Also, between 1976 and 1985, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, a tiny French territory off of Canada, was also an overseas department, but then they became an autonomous territorial collectivity instead. So overall, it was through France's weird decolonization process that some small areas of its empire ended up becoming an integral part of the home country itself. France wasn't even the only European country to try this. Denmark tried it briefly with Greenland, while Portugal tried it with all of their colonies, and it ended rather badly with all of their former colonies either fighting for independence or being invaded by another nation. So France was arguably the most successful in this strategy, and it's why technically the correct map of France looks like this. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.